It's 8:01.
It is.
Why don't we turn it over to you to kick things off, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Let's go there. So talking of beautiful weather and long weekends ahead for most of us, does depend where you're joining us from, for those of you in Canada. This is a photograph taken this week, actually, from the top of one of our buildings, State Residences, and it is gorgeous out there. We're lucky. We live on some beautiful land, and at the beginning of every Friday webinar that we do, it is important to us just to pause and stop and recognize where it is that we're located. So if you're joining us in Canada, thank you for taking a moment just to pause with us. If you're joining us from outside Canada too, this is a great chance just to stop and think about, where are you? What are we doing today? What's coming up on the weekend? And what kind of land around you do you have to appreciate and recognize? Here in Calgary, which is where Sate's situated, you can see from our turf field there that that's us. We are located on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot and the people of the Treaty 7. That includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Îyârhe Nakoda of Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Goodstoney. And this area, the Blackfoot tribes traditionally called Mokintis, which it means the joining of two rivers, the Bow River and the Elbow River. You can't quite see it in this picture, but the Bow River is just in front of the high-rise buildings. Obviously, we now call it Calgary, which is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta. Thanks, Craig.
Perfect. Thank you, Jenny. And just some housekeeping, folks, before we get going. Clearly, the chat folks have found that, and that's always a great place for you to carry on the conversation, share your ideas and thoughts with each other. And you will see in there, I've also put in some links to the upcoming sessions. Take a chance to register while you're there, etc. Please do connect with me and Jenny on LinkedIn. We're more than happy to connect with folks. As we go through this morning, if you have specific questions you would like to pose on the topic, please try and use the Q&A function. It should be the icon next to your chat at the bottom of your screen. The chat typically can fly by at times and we can miss questions in there. So if you have specific questions, please pop them into the Q&A. And we will do our best to create a safe space to answer those questions. And there's the segue, Jenny. So we're here to chat about psychological safety. And I'm just going to throw this out there and give you the opportunity to take a direction that you like to go. You know, what is it? What isn't it? Is it just a buzzword that we've been hearing lots and lots about? Dealer's choice. How would you like to start this morning?
Dealer's choice. We do like those buzzwords, don't we? I call them the kale of the day. There's a few of them out there. But psychological safety, it's been around for a while. And I think that's a really good place for us to start, is what is it and what isn't it? It is, if we take Amy Edmondson's definition. Now, Amy Edmondson, for those, perhaps it's a new topic to you. I'm not a fan of the thought leader. She's an incredible lady. One of the first to sort of bring it to general recognition. But it was around long before Amy Edmondson brought it to the forefront in 2018. But the definition that's kind of stuck is that climate where people feel safe enough to take interpersonal risks. And by interpersonal risks, we mean asking the question, sharing concerns, giving our ideas, even if they're not fully formed, anything that requires that interpersonal risk between people. And the other thing I'd add with psychological safety is that it's that climate piece of environment. It's like an umbrella over a team. It's over a group of people. When we talk about one-on-one, we might talk a bit more about trust. And you can't build psychological safety if you don't have trust within your team members. What it's not, there's a whole host of things it's not. In its most sort of obvious form, we see teams that appear to be very nice, very lovely, very cordial. But the problem is that when we need those gritty conversations, when we need that friction piece, nobody's talking. Or, you know, it's not protecting emotions. It's not having besties on your team the whole time. It's a little bit gritty. And I think one of the problems, to your point, Craig, is it just the sort of craze of the day? We latched onto this because one of the ways that it came to our social media really is the way that it emerged, was because Project Aristotle, which was a Google project, recognized that their highest performing teams had this thing that they called psychological safety. So everybody says, okay, well, if Google's high performing teams has it, we need it too. How do we do that? And so now it sits as a little bit of a checkbox, and it can't be the goal. Like it's a whole collection of behaviors that lead to this climate. It's not a check situation. There you go. There's tons at you. Now you pick.
So you just can't declare that we are psychologically safe and move on, is what you're saying.
Sadly, no. And I would
No.
also suggest that you don't sit down with your team and say, let's have a conversation about psychological safety, because
Well, yeah, well, that's interesting because that was a question I was going to pose to you here at some point, but let's just put a pin in that one for right now because you talked about high performance teams.
Yeah.
And I think what I'd like to try and dive into a little bit is so high performing teams have a high degree of psychological safety. I think we
Research
can
shows that. Yeah, most do.
research shows that. So what does that look like in practice? So if you're a leader
Mm,
and you're looking at your team, like how does a leader recognize that you actually have a good level of psychological safety on your team?
good question. So I think there's a number of different things that you can look for. One, how does the team handle failure? Two, as a leader, if you're really looking for it, does your team challenge you? And often the problem with that is when we get challenged, the ego comes to play. And so as a leader, you'll push it slightly, or you might rebut against it. And there's nothing wrong with that rebuttal. We're talking respect. How does that conversation happen? But actually, as a leader, if your team challenge you, that is greatest compliment ever, because they feel safe enough to do that. But how does that conversation carry on? So when we're in that climate that we're talking about, the challenge, intellectual friction's high, social friction is low. And so that's a key piece within there. I think as a leader, too, is when everybody knows each other well enough beyond the job title. So we've talked about it lots. How are you building your social capital? Because if all we know is our function, we've nothing else to work with or go on. And we like to have those different connections that we can make. You and I can disagree vibrantly in a meeting and still laugh and talk about hockey half hour later, my lack of knowledge of hockey, no doubt. But that, because we've got that social capital, I see more to you than Craig, who wants to achieve this number. And I'm like, well, we can't get to that number, whatever that might be.
All right. Yeah, debate, I think, is respectful debate is a good sign. I like
Yeah.
that comment you made about, is your team willing to challenge you?
Yes.
And that I think could be a real flag for some folks if you pause and think about it and realize that no, not really. Team just generally agrees with me or doesn't say anything to your
Mm-hmm.
point. There's got to be some flags for you to consider. But the whole concept of, respectful debate and challenge and be able to have a conversation and then to at least be able to commit and move forward. Right. So
Yeah.
I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but is there something in there around, you know, it's good to be challenged and good to challenge each other and have those conversations. But
It
at
is.
some point you do have to put a stick in the sand and say, we've made this decision and whether we agree with it or not, we're going forward. I don't know if there's
Yeah, so
something.
the challenge is good. Like when we think about what organizations are asking from their leaders, they want innovation, collaboration, creativity. Those three more buzzwords for you right there. Each one of those in any form is a social process, and a social process means people. And so for us to hit that high performance as people, we're going to need that environment. Let's call it psychological safety here and now. It is to be able to have those conversations to get there, because we can't be creative and innovative if we all sit around the table and agree with each other. Or, and we've spoken about this a lot, if you're the hippo in the room, highest individually paid person's opinion, and you come in and just give your idea, and then we all just agree with you because you've said that and you've made your mind up. That's not a healthy challenge or healthy debate or even a healthy collaboration. So how do we make the conflict productive is one part of it. We need the conflict, but we will need it to be productive. And then the other part I think that's important here is, as a leader, how are you showing up? Because there's a big difference between a collaborator and an opponent. If you are just, I'm just being devil's advocate and I'm pushing back at you, that's a bit more of an opponent than a collaboration perspective to it. As a leader, and there's tons of us out there, do you have the need to be right? Because if you need to be right, that conversation is going to stop much quicker. How does your curiosity sit? And the problem is, a lot of the time we're under the pressure of time. And so curiosity, understanding, even collaboration all take time, and we want an answer yesterday. So how do we blend those two things? And we talk all the time about tension in leadership, tension in workplaces. This is a healthy tension that we need to find the balance with our teams within. To your point, if you hold the title of leader, leader is a role, leadership is a behavior, then yes, we do have to put a stick in the sand at some point, or we have to make a decision. But there is a big difference in the decision that the team can own. Even if I don't completely agree, I know the good reason behind it, than a decision that the leaders just meant and said, we're going this way. Now, sometimes we have to do that, but are we making sure that when we don't have to do that, we've got that climate going on?
Yeah, no, I was just going to comment on that. And those situations are typically very rare, few and far between, where you basically have to say, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Usually it's
That is, yeah, that's not the norm. If it is the norm, that's perhaps a different podcast. I'm not sure what to make of that one, but there are, how do you bring that in? One of the things that we've talked about before is, if you don't have that active dissent on your team, right? I can't remember what you called the exercise, but appointing somebody's the devil's advocate, or putting the empty chair at the table, and
that works.
right? I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit, because I think that's a very tactical and practical tip that we could share.
And it speaks to, like, you definitely, before you start that, you're not saying, okay, let's make this a psychologically safe conversation. What you're saying is, the value and the contribution in this conversation is us disagreeing. So let's set up, okay, one of the fundamentals of psychological safety, set the stage. So what does active dissent or positive dissent look like? And I mean, you create these as your team. It speaks to your culture, but things like, um, observe, don't interpret, ask, don't tell, focus on the issue, not the person. I mean, there's 3 simple ones for you, and you can whatever. Not, I mean, you don't want to list too long, but those are the guardrails. This is acceptable. This is not. And so if you come in telling me how it should be, somebody's able to say, no, that's not the way we're operating in here. And then once you've got that set up, the exercise that you're talking about actually comes from David Marquay. He calls them red and black cards. I use playing cards, and one of them has a different picture on it. And if you get the picture when we hand the cards out, your job is to disagree. And so what happens within a group that's not used to this, a group that's used to sitting and is that somebody will say, okay, well, the card's making me say this. What if this is the case? And it is basically playing devil's advocate. And eventually what you see happen is someone across the table will say, can you give me the card, please? And then they'll disagree. And then eventually you don't need the card, because we've set up that climate where actually this disagreement or this dissent or seeing it differently becomes really healthy. And another version is the empty chair. I love the empty chair in a meeting room. Okay, what would the stakeholder say? What would the client say? What would the team who's not here say? It just allows us to speak from different perspectives, to see from different perspectives, or even just to open up that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it well, for lack of a better word, not forces, but gives permission to somebody to dissent who may be afraid to dissent.
Totally. In psychological safety, what we're talking about is permission and respect. And as we move through this and we get better and better and better, it's all those are the guardrails. So giving permission is key. And I think the one piece we need to include in there, like, we've sort of set the stage, we've had the conversation, but especially as a leader, but we want to watch our team for this too, is, are your responses productive? And we are always projecting something. So I'm not just talking about the verbal response. All my fellow eye rollers, that's a response too.
I don't know if you caught that. We got some questions here. I think we should pop over to one. It's interesting. I think we get versions of this question for almost every topic that we cover,
Okay.
and that is, how does one manage up psychological safety if those above don't practice it?
We do.
Yeah.
No, okay. So but this is key, and we need to always be talking about this. The person that you're managing up to is a human being as well. That's the first part that I will always say. So the rules aren't that much different. Psychological safety is about a climate. So the first thing that we need to build is the trust. And when you're looking at trust with that person, where has trust been eroded that you don't feel safe enough to speak up? And there's some interesting research. I can't remember whose it is, but you only need 7% of a team to start to model the behaviors, and it will ripple through that team pretty quickly. So if you have a small group of you that are prepared to practice that and prepared to put that into action, it is amazing the traction that it can get pretty quickly. So what I'm talking about in a team conversation, let's say, is if somebody makes a suggestion and the leader goes to shut it down, it is well within your own leadership. Leadership is behavior, not necessarily a role, to say, actually, I think that's a good question. Could we double click on that?
Mm.
Simple as that. Or, somebody makes a suggestion and someone says, oh yeah, well, we tried that last year or something along those lines. I know we tried that last year, and I think there's a seed or there's a nugget in there that we could actually pull out and expand on. The problem with it, Craig, is it requires a courage.
Yeah.
And that's the risk. So there's always risk within psychological safety as well. We're always weighing up, will I or won't I? And then I think the other thing that's really important, and I think leaders need to know this too, you can do everything in the right sort of frame to build this climate, but you still have humans showing up in your team, and every person on your team has a different story. And you can't control that story, and you can't control what they turn up with. So if I've come to your team and I'm pretty new and my experience in my old place of work was horrible, and I got shut down every time I spoke, it's in fact the reason that I left, it might still take me a while to change that. And that's difficult. Like we've just got to be aware of that. We can have the conversation, but we can't control other people. We can only set it up for success.
Yeah, and if you're in a position where you're worried, there's just a comment I saw fly by in the chat earlier that, being vocal is going to quote unquote get you into trouble. That's a tough spot from where to start.
It really is a tough spot. I think, there's a couple of things to look at. First off, always come this way. Okay, so what does vocal look like? If you're blaming, shaming, or judging upwards, then yes, you're gonna activate the ego and the challenge and everything else. So is your language matching the situation? Right? Permission and respect. Do you have permission to speak up? If not, then you can ask for that.
Yeah.
And sort of it's gradual. This is a thing. There isn't a 10-step, you will get it if you do this. It's about building the relationship and building the climate.
Yeah, and to your point, I think we often come into these conversations or these ideas and think that, where am I going with this? You talked about time earlier,
Yeah.
right? And I guess I'm trying to tie this together, is that a lot of this is work and it takes time to
Yeah.
happen, right?
Yes.
Especially, we don't know where your starting point is, but it may take days, weeks, months to move from here to there. It's not going to be the result of, I was on this webinar and I'm now going to throw a red card down and say, I disagree, right? And
Well,
suddenly it's all great, right?
and I think the other part too is that it doesn't finish.
No.
Like it doesn't ever finish, and you can continue to learn. Like when we're working with people, there's always, oh, I never thought of trying that, or I never thought of trying that. So we can bring those in, and then we've got to put them into practice and see how that works, and does that fit our team, and bend it. And then someone from our team leaves and somebody else comes in. Okay, well, really, we're kind of starting again and bringing that person in within it. And to remain at high performance, that is consistent. work. And so it doesn't stop.
No. Another question here, I think it kind of ties with a couple other ideas that I was looking at, is that do you think extrinsic factors outside a team can make or break the psychological safety of that team, or willingness of its members to engage in those positive behaviors? So extrinsic, external factors. It's Friday morning. External factors can make or break the psychological safety of a team. And I think I'll also tie into this, because you and I were talking in the pre-show around, if things aren't going well on the team, if there's pressure for results or whatever it might be. So they kind of fit together.
They
But
do.
yeah.
I think it has potential. And I think it really, if ever there was a time for a team to lean in and engage in that culture that they've built, hoping that they've built it, that's it. Because if that pressure is a condition from the outside that we can't control, often we can't control the conditions. So the pandemic gives us a good example. Right? There's nothing we could do about that. Those are the conditions. And so the teams that had the psychological safety already built were the teams that were able to pause and have that really, and I've no doubt it was vibrant conversation. How are we going to make this work? Like, what does this actually look like? And you see it even now. Okay, well, are we bringing everybody back to face, or are we staying hybrid? There are different perspectives in there. And where you get a conversation that you're managing because it's so vibrant, there's that psychological safety. So I think they can affect it. And the other thing that springs to my mind, Margaret Heffernan's analogy, every good company is made up of your bricks. And your bricks are your objectives, your vision, your mission, your values, whatever all that stuff is. But it's the mortar between the bricks that holds the company together. And that mortar is your people and the connection between your people. And so it doesn't matter what the external factor is the connection between your people. And another one that leaders might have to consider, and I'm not opening this box, but in a lot of our performance management systems, we run people in competition against each other. And that actually makes it quite hard to have that connection and have that safety. So as a leader, you're working with some extra dimensions. It's not impossible, but you have to be aware of that. And that's in that set the stage piece. What is acceptable? What's not acceptable? How are we doing that?
Yeah. I think the other thing that came to mind for me here too is, what is it you're hoping for? So if you're dealing with these external factors, or you're dealing with conditions that have changed that are affecting performance, results, outcomes, are you trying to get back to what you had before?
Yeah.
Right? Are you tethered to that point going, we have to get back to what this was, or do you go, we need to go in a new direction?
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're tethered to this and not willing to think about what the other possibility is, there is going to be a tension there that you might not be able to resolve.
And I love that word, possibility, because to me, the root of psychological safety is now we're talking about possibilities. We've worked so long in the world of expectations, whereas possibilities, where are we going? And then, and you did open a great box there, is if we want to go over here, what does it need to get there? How will we work together to get there? What does that look like in terms of support, in terms of learning? What does success look like? What does failure look like? Those are fantastic conversations that rarely happen, that actually create the psychological safety. Because if you have said to me, okay, success looks like this is what we will deem a failure. But if we do fail, it's a fail that we're aware of. That's what we call an intelligent failure. And we're going to stop and we're going to learn from that. Okay, well, now all of a sudden, I'm going to tell you when it's not going right, because we're going to learn from that. And the whole point of learning is to evolve, to your point, right? To evolve our beliefs, not to confirm what we already know. That's not learning. It's to evolve what we know. And so when we set up those conversations, that's allowing us to behave into the climate that we want. Boom.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a leader, you could be you're in this sandwich situation, right? Let's carry on this example. You're trying to take your team through, okay, this is what is now possible and where we could go versus, being tied back to here.
Okay.
But if you're the leader who has the group above you saying, well, no, we still expect what was back here, how do you there's a lot of this managing up conversation that we have had here, and how do you reset those expectations, and do you have the ability and the safety to go to this level and say what we were expecting here isn't possible now,
Mm,
but this is what is possible.
yeah. It is a big. So I think there's a degree of influence in here. And you can keep this simple because we could talk for days on this whole part. If you're trying to influence and it's somebody else, anybody else, up, down, sideways, whatever, one of the easiest versions to speak in is how are they judged? Because that's what they care about.
Yep.
Right? We come with all our mess, they care about how they're judged. So rather than talking about all our mess, we're going to talk about how they're judged and how doing this will help that. If there's absolutely no correlation between how they're judged and what you're intending to do, then that might be a point to stop and come back to the drawing board, because we need that alignment. We've got to go that way. We might just be doing it differently, or it's a different possibility. The other thing that I was going to say is, we're back to almost like that courage conversation. And you and I spoke about this a little bit, I think it was last week. Safety and comfy are not the same things. And so when we lean in on that safety piece, we're taking a risk. So that possibility is a risk. And so by the time you go to talk up, can you talk about that and what that looks like? So what will success look like? What will failure look like? It was back to the same things we were saying. Here's what we're doing. If that is all aligning, who said it? Chris Shambrook said it. That's a conspiracy towards excellence. I don't know many people who are going to disagree with that. But
A
you've got to have the
conspiracy
conversations here.
toward excellence. That's
Isn't that a
sorry.
great combination of words?
Yeah,
I told him I was going to quote him on that one. I did.
that's funny. Yeah. Okay, there's a few more questions here that have popped in. The first one is around, is there a report or document about the Aristotle project? I'm sure there is, and
I'm
we
positive there
probably
is. Yeah.
we'll
Just-
find and share that with the follow-up notes. There's a couple here that kind of go together.
Okay.
So how can a team recover from an unsafe environment? I've stepped in to manage a team that had poor leadership previously, and there's still a lot of hesitancy. Let's put that together with, I'm now a co-leader on a team which did not previously have psychological safety. The same leader is still here. No one challenged, no one spoke up. I'm thinking that you will get there, but how do we change that culture and have the other leader on board? I'd like to be intentional about this. So it's kind of the like recovering from this. If I can put those together, saying recovering from a place of poor psychological safety. The one nuance is we have somebody responsible for the previous situation still there.
Okay. Um, first, always build the social capital, build the connection. So there's a connection between the people. And that's not a fun-filled day off-site. It could be, it could help, but you can build connection in every meeting, in every conversation that you have. And the key here is it's not just leader and connection with the people on the team. The team has to build connection with each other as well. So we always refer to, excuse me, connect before content. In every meeting you have, even if you only take 2 minutes, I'd love to see you take 10 minutes. How are you building that connection before content? And they don't have to be the fluffy questions and conversations. If you Google it, you'll get all kinds of, superfluous stuff. Like, we really want to get to know who's who on our team. So when you're rebuilding, or if you're coming in and it's not great, that's the first part that we want to do, is build that social capital, build that cohesion amongst the people. Then I would suggest when you look at Tim Clark's work, the first level of psychological safety is inclusion. And we're actually quite rubbish at inclusion despite all the conversations that have happened. So does your team feel like they belong to a team? right? There's a good conversation. What is it that we do as a team? What are our rituals? What are our values? How do we operate? How do we operate to other teams? How do we operate to our external people? And already you can see this is time. It's not just happening overnight. And then I think the other part is, are you modeling the behaviors that you want to see? That's crucial from a leader. You're always projecting something. And so when in that team where you're a co-leader and there's one that doesn't, and you're the one that does, or you're the one that wants to, it's just like we spoke about earlier. Somebody speaks up in a meeting. What's your productive response to that? And if you have a voice at that table, you have a voice at that table. And you get what you tolerate. So if you let the other one shut it down and you tolerate that, you just said to the team, okay, well, this is appropriate for us. So don't tolerate it. And be careful in there. Rule number one, do no harm. Calling someone out around a table of people is often blame, shame, and judgment. So call
Yeah.
them in, have a conversation afterwards, one-on-one. Calling in is usually better than calling out.
Yeah,
Hopefully
absolutely.
that's enough. It's a start, anyways.
Yep. Another question here. How does a psychologically safe culture set a company apart from its competitors? How does
Oh,
it drive competitive advantage?
your turnover will be an awful lot less. Your productivity will be higher. Your performance will be higher. Your creativity, innovation will be higher. People will want to come to work. And once you start to get those, there's a momentum going that way. And if you want the solid textbook answer, we can send you here's the reasons to do it. But it just provides a better environment. And the other thing I would say at the moment too, like we're all full of reskilling and upskilling, and AI is doing this, so we have to learn to do that. You have the psychological safety that becomes an environment where learning is part of the fabric. And Craig, you wrote about that, I think, this week on LinkedIn. It was a good article. That's something that we have to do is create these cultures of learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing I would add too, because it leads into my next question. So, but when you have that psychologically safe space, you have teams that are willing to give each other feedback. You have teams that are
Oh,
willing
yeah,
to
it's
try and right, really willing to try and to potentially fail.
yes.
So, maybe Jenny, we could touch a little bit on, the role of feedback and the role of failure in trying
Mm-hmm.
to create a psychologically safe space.
Okay. Yes, a good question and well brought in because we haven't talked about that. So in the levels, so I talked about the first one is inclusion safety. The next level that we'd get to if we've got the inclusion safety is learner safety. And if we're going to learn, we're going to fail. And even if we're not learning, we're humans, we're going to make mistakes. So what we've seen in the reaction to psychological safety are the crazy sentences. Celebrate your failures, all of them. Fail fast, fail gracefully. Like then that's not very helpful. Like, lots of people are saying to me, I don't want to celebrate this failure. Okay, let's destigmatize failure. How are you dealing with the mistake that's happened? Amy Edmondson, I actually think she is the go-to in this area. Her new book, The Right Kind of Wrong, is fantastic. And it's in our resources. I've already got that in the resource slide for this week. So for those of you here for the first time, the slides come out as a PDF. Well, I don't use them in here, but they're there. And the second slide, I think when you get it, always has 2 or 3 resources on it. She talks about 3 different kinds of failure. And I think that's important for us to get our heads around is there are sort of basic or simple or sort of everyday failures. These are the ones we make because of an inattention or we didn't obey the process or whatever that might be. And so that's a very different conversation to the intelligent failure. And an intelligent failure is one that we have set up. That's almost like an experiment. We're going to try this for a little bit. And our aim is to learn from it. And if we get success, fantastic. But if we don't, the whole key is that we've got a whole load of, let's call it data, that we can learn from. In the middle of there is this complex idea of a complex failure. And that's when there's lots of different things at play. And it's really hard to pinpoint where the failure is. So then we're looking at that kind of retro analysis afterwards to look at that. So we've got all these different kinds of failures. the simple sort of route for a leader is, how are you destigmatizing failure? And this is one where people's past experience really comes in, because lots of people grew up in an environment where you spilt the milk and somebody yelled at you, and it's like World War III because you dropped a glass of milk. And other people have come from an environment where you spill the milk, someone hands you a cloth and say, please clean that up. Those are two really different ways to handle failure. So you're dealing with the humans on your team who are all going to handle failure. And then the other thing, this is a really long answer for you,
That's okay.
is, as a leader, are you talking about your failures, your mistakes, what's happened? Because if you're not talking about them, your team don't want to talk about them. And I just saw, I think it came by in the chat there, the difference between falling and failing. Simon Sinek has a 2-minute little video that talks about, what if we change the word to falling? So if you fall off your bike, it's really funny for me to say, I did fall off my bike recently. You get back on and you ride again, right? But if you fail, our instant reaction to that is, oh, done. So sometimes falling as opposed to failing.
Absolutely. I think the other thing too, something that came to me, Jenny, is a concept that we've talked about here before is, what can you pre-approve? And I'm going to take this from the perspective of, what failures are okay ahead of time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you do fail, like it's kind of like you're pre-approving experiments,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the expectation is come back and tell the rest of the team what you learned,
Brilliant. And
right?
if you have that conversation, we're set up for success. Yeah. That's
Yeah. And there's, and I think it was Jeff Bezos talks about level 1 versus level 2 failures.
right.
Level 1 is, Amazon doesn't exist anymore. Level 2 is, the company's still going to carry forward, but you've learned something, right? And so, yeah, don't go experimenting with potential level 1 failures, but
No.
level 2 failures for sure.
Yeah.
See, we have time for, I think, a couple more questions here before we've got to start wrapping it up. Uh, on some of our operational teams, we've had people give up sharing their opinions and concerns. So they've quit sharing their opinions. Now leaders are being asked to work on psychological safety. One thing we're considering one thing we're considering is some sort of peer support model. Have you heard of a peer support model working to improve psychological safety overall? Would that be like the 7% change idea? I'm not familiar with the 7% change idea. I don't know if you are, but peer support groups for psychological safety.
So I think the 7% is what I was chatting about before, where you just need 7% of your team to adopt. So if 7% of the team are sharing their concerns, theoretically, that will catch on and breed. I wish I could remember who said that. McKinsey. I think it was McKinsey. Okay, so peer support. Peer support is good if you've got the connection between your teams. I think a lot of it comes down to, if that's happening somewhere, we've missed the fundamentals of psychologically safe. So actually the first thing I would do is go out and talk to your people one-on-one, have a conversation. I've noticed that nobody's sharing their ideas or their concerns. Can you fill me in a bit on that? Now, the key with that, though, is the trust piece, the sincerity, right? If you're just
Yeah.
going to go and go, and you're not really listening, then you're not achieving that aim. But people want to be seen, heard, and understood. So Craig, as a director, if you go down 3 levels and engage in conversation there and actually care and listen, which means the voice share is far more on the other side, I think you'd be amazed at what you find. If you're not going to get anything back from those people, and I don't mean you personally, but then you're right back at square one. You've got to start building the connections really quickly. Once you've got that information, it probably will be pretty clear as to whether this is, we haven't set the stage properly, or we haven't actually created the space for people to talk. I think about it 9 times out of 10. Okay, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Let's go round table. Never going to work, right? That's not a space for voice at all. So there are different structures and different processes that we can use to create that space effectively for people to share their voices and their opinions. And it's not an anonymous survey either. And then the other key thing, and this is something that leadership teams could work on, is what is your productive response? And what are you doing with that? And how are you making that work? So next time somebody who hasn't shared an opinion, a concern, or whatever does, what does that look like, sound like on your side as you respond to that?
Yeah. Yeah, you were triggering me with my favorite activity is the round table discussion. So
Mm.
we kind of have the same opinion there. But Jenny, we're getting real close to that time, and I know you've got lots of great ideas to share here as we wrap up today. So we've got a couple of questions, folks, that we will try and get to in the follow-up. We have them. We won't lose them. We will be sure to answer them in the follow-up material. But Jenny, why don't you take us through a big idea and some strategies and multiple questions to ponder.
Okay, so this should take us right there. There we are. At the end of every one of these, we try and finish with one big idea, two things that you can take away and use straight away. And the ask from me is 3 questions. We'll see how that goes. So one big idea, I'm not going to read this out to you. You can see it on there. And we spoke about this at the beginning. And if by chance you're simply listening to us, check out the slides in the links that we send afterwards. But we really have to move away from saying we need to achieve this psychological safety and do the work in how do we behave our way into the environment that we're trying to create. And that does require modeling and leadership and self-awareness, I think. So 2 things that you could take and try out straight away. The first one, I like this. I think Blythe Butler introduced me to this term, speaking in draft. So one of the reasons that we often stay quiet and don't speak up is we want to be perfect. We're scared that we aren't quite getting it right. So we've talked a lot this morning about how permission is really important, permission and respect. So what if as a leader, you give your team the opportunity, and it depends on the conversation, but the opportunity to speak in draft. And so if we're in a collaborative meeting or we're looking for ideas or we're just, we're throwing things up there to see what sticks and what doesn't, what if you started by setting the stage and saying, okay, and for the next half hour or this part of the meeting or for this entire meeting, let's all talk in draft. It doesn't matter if it's perfect. It doesn't matter if it's fully formed. This is about your contributions. And then within there again, the productive response is going to be like just crucial within there. So when we do that, we get all those things that you can see on the slide there as well. The other one to take away, and you are going to need to come back and look at this slide. There's a lot of information on here. This is Amy Edmondson's spectrum of failure. And I love this as a language piece, because what she's done is taken at one end of the continuum, we've blameworthy failures, and at the other end of the continuum, we've praiseworthy. And the cool part is when you look at this, is that very, very few things that we do are actually worthy of blame. So that's a real shift in culture straight away, because we're very quick to blame. It's easy to throw blame. And it's not until we become aware of that we realize just how much we do that. And so you can only actually blame somebody if it's sabotage. Now we're changing our language as we move up within that spectrum. So I think understanding and talking about what do failures look like, you spoke about this really well earlier, Craig. And okay, if it does look like this, I'm pre-approving that, but I do want to know what the learning is. I do want to know what we found out. Then we're changing our mindset. And that's what this is really about. And I think it was our title, From Mandate to Mindset. What is the mindset that we need? And just for ease there as well, in that if you want to frame what something as learning, what did we think would happen? What did we actually see happen? What did we learn? And what will we do next time? That's kind of cool. And so that's really instilling that learning. Okay, 3 questions that you can walk away with this morning and noodle over the weekend and into next week. And just because I will never give you just 3 questions, there's actually 6 for you there. So take your pick. It's a big, big topic. You might see one on there that just grabs you and you're like, oh, when was the last time I said thank you to somebody who challenged me in a meeting? That's a game changer right there. So, what are we recognizing? What are we tolerating? And the big one, we began to touch on this at the end. How are you setting up the space for people to join the conversation? Roundtable isn't the answer. There you go.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
folks, we are back next week. We're
Yeah,
back to back,
yeah.
and then we'll be gone for a couple of weeks. But we're back next week to talk about engagement surveys. More importantly, what do you do with them once you have
Mhm.
them? How do you make them useful? And then we're back in November. We will have some resources. And I know there was a question earlier around books that we could recommend on this topic. There are books that will be coming out in the resources. So please do
Agree on the slides.
watch for that. As always, thank you so much for joining us, Jenny. Thank you. I appreciate you. Great conversation once again. And everybody have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Hopefully you're able to celebrate with family, friends in a meaningful way and whatever's meaningful to you. So please enjoy it and have some turkey. So anyway,
Even if you don't have turkey, have a good weekend.
exactly. So
Thank you.
have a great weekend, everyone. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.